Hi everyone, I'm Christian van Nieuwerburgh, Executive Director of Growth Coaching International, and we're here in our offices in Sydney. GCI is a professional development consultancy and coach training organization. We work primarily in the education sector, and our focus is on the use of coaching in schools. When we talk about the fact that we work in the coaching and education sector, a lot of people ask us what that means. So in this brief video, I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on what we mean when we're talking about coaching in education. Our work is underpinned by a theory that we've called, it's a framework that we've called the Global Framework for Coaching and Mentoring in Education. We've developed this in collaboration, so it was myself, also our good colleague in the United States, Jim Knight, president of the Instructional Coaching Group, and also our very own John Campbell, who's founding director of GCI. So the three of us were trying to scope out this idea of coaching in education. And our question was, where is coaching in education being used? And again, to go back to that original question, people sometimes say, oh, coaching in education, does that mean you work with students? Are you working with parents? Is it teachers that you work with? So I just want to kind of explore that. I'm going to use the flip chart just to draw out the global framework, and I'll explain it as I go along. So first of all, it's called the global framework because the idea was that we wanted to bring together what we're learning about coaching and education across the world. But we primarily looked at the work that was emerging from the United Kingdom and some of the work, for example, that Professor Rachel Lofthouse was doing there. We wanted to bring together the work that was happening in the United States, primarily the work of Dr. Jim Knight, but other people as well working in the US, and also the work that was emerging from here in Australia and from New Zealand as well. So that's why we called it the global framework. And it's the global framework for coaching and mentoring in education. So although our primary interest in designing this was from a coaching point of view, we were also recognizing that coaching and mentoring are pretty closely related ways of supporting educators, teachers, students, and leaders. So that's why we called it the global framework for coaching and mentoring. And importantly for us, our focus was in the education sector. So this is what I'm going to be discussing right now. So first of all, the question is, where is coaching being used in the education sector currently? That was our starting point. And one area is around educational leadership. And what that means, what we meant by that is there is coaching and mentoring that's taking place in order to enhance educational leadership. If we look at the research, the academic work into effective schools, there's quite a body of research that suggests one way to ensure effective teaching and learning is to have good leadership in those educational institutions. So that's why educational leadership is a good place probably to start. So what does that look like? Well, it could be the idea of providing educational leaders with training around coaching, so that they can integrate coaching approaches into their leadership style. It could be supporting leaders to coach one another, peer coaching between leaders. We actually have a program called Leaders Coaching Leaders that encourages that. It could be providing executive type coaching to educational leaders as well. And GCI is involved across those areas. So that's an example. So one part of the global framework is to recognize that there's work happening using coaching and mentoring to support educational leaders and educational leadership. Now the other part I'm going to look at is what we've called professional practice. Now, most of the research in this area has been focused on teaching practice, pedagogy or andragogy if you like. So this quadrant is saying that there's quite a lot of coaching and mentoring work going on to improve the practice of professionals who work in educational institutions. So that could be lecturers and academics at university, it could be teachers, it could be learning support assistants, all of those people who work in educational institutions. And the question is, how can we use coaching to enhance that professional practice? So, for example, here, instructional coaching, the work of Dr. Jim Knight, plays a huge role here because instructional coaching is clearly focused on improving teaching practice, for example. But that's not the only way. There's, again, lots of other ways that coaching and mentoring are being used to try to improve this. Peer-to-peer support. So that in that case, we would train teachers in coaching skills, and then they would apply these skills in professional conversations with one another. So there's a whole range of things happening here, which is about using coaching or mentoring to improve the professional practice of educators. And again, when we come back to the academic research into what leads to effective educational institutions, there's a whole body of research that suggests focusing on leadership would be a good thing to do. But then another huge body of research saying, well, the really key factor is, for example, the quality of teaching in every classroom. That's another real big area of focus. And across the US, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and other parts of the world, coaching is being used effectively to enhance these things. So those we've called the whole thing that I'm drawing here a kind of a playing field. This is the area in which coaching and education happens. So now I want to go to the third area, which some would argue has particular significance, and this is the question of how can we use coaching to enhance the student or learner experience. And this is a really important question. And you know, compared to the use of coaching and mentoring in educational leadership and coaching and mentoring in professional practice, there's relatively less work going on around using coaching and mentoring directly to enhance student experience, particularly from a research angle. And so what does that mean? Well, there has been some research done to show the impact of coaching some students around their examination performance and comparing them to students who hadn't been coached. And that study, Passmore and Brown, suggested that the provision of coaching to support exam preparation actually does lead to improved examination results. So that's one example. I was involved in a research study, Van Nieuwerburgh and Tong, and that study, quite an interesting one, where we trained some students to coach other students, and the findings from that study suggested, for example, that those students who we trained to be coaches, that in fact there were benefits for them. For example, increases in emotional intelligence, improved attitude to learning, improved communication skills. So a range of benefits even for those we trained to be coaches. There's also the idea of training even elementary or primary school students in some important coaching related skills and seeing how they might use those with one another. So there's quite a lot of work around coaching in directly to impact on the student experience, and some research also showing that using coaching might even enhance the well-being of young people, including aspirations and many other benefits of using coaching directly to enhance student experience. So now you can see the model as we currently have it is there's 4 quadrants. The reason it has 4 quadrants is it seemed to myself and Jim Knight and John Campbell that these are the areas in which there's most coaching and mentoring taking place, and there was already some research around each of these. But the quadrant I'm showing now is the least researched, and this is what we've called community engagement. And community engagement relates to how can we use coaching to enhance community engagement, but another way to put it might be how can coaching be used to strengthen the relationship between an educational institution and its community. So you can think about parents, governors, other stakeholders within the educational institution's community. So examples of this might be providing input to parents around the benefits of coaching young people, or sharing some of the tools and techniques that coaches might use with students. And I did that very recently, only about 10 days ago. I delivered an input to parents at a school in Scotland. So that would be one example. The other would be for the school to involve parents in coaching initiatives, maybe go out to the community and see if there's coaches or mentors within that community who might support students within the school. It could simply be educators learning about a coaching approach to having parent conferences or parent-teacher meetings. There's a whole range of ways that coaching can be used to enhance the ways that educational institutions relate to their communities. Now, for me, so what's emerging here as we've been talking, and this is the global framework, it's saying there are coaching or mentoring interventions happening in these areas, and we've picked the ones where we think there's work happening and there's some research to support that work. Now, the really important part of the global framework, but also a really important part of the work we do here at GCI, is to remember that really all of this work, all of the coaching that happens in these places are about student success and well-being. So we put that right at the heart of our model. And the way I would characterize this is it's a reminder to say that we're working to improve professional practice so that students can succeed and experience well-being. We work directly with students in order to help that. We want to enhance educational leadership so that we get better student success and well-being in educational institutions. And we want to link better to the community so that the community can be part of this process as well. So when people ask me, what is coaching in education? How is it different from other coaching in other sectors? One key factor is this, that coaching in education is about student success and well-being. And a challenge I often pose to educational institutions is, the question is, if you are coaching your educational leadership team, or there is coaching happening to improve teaching practice, my question is, how does that impact on student success and well-being? And if it's effective coaching being used in an educational setting, there will be a clear link between those two things. Now, I can imagine anybody looking at this framework might say, well, that's okay, student success and well-being, and we're all on board with that. What about the success and well-being of educators, educational leaders, and other staff who work in educational settings? Well, of course that's important, and our view would be that unless you have staff and working in educational institutions who are experiencing well-being and who themselves are succeeding, unless you have that, it's very difficult to get to this. So that's kind of implied in the model that we're suggesting. The final part of the global framework, this still relates to this idea of what is coaching and education. So coaching and education is about doing coaching or mentoring in any of these sectors. But then around this, what we've drawn is a circle that we call educational environment. So all of this happens within an educational environment. And more research is needed around this. Some people refer to this as a coaching culture. I'm not sure that's the most helpful term, because coaching may be part of that, but it's not the only element. So we've put this within the educational environment, and we've got this circle going around it so that we can be clear that, first of all, the educational environment of an institution will have an impact on how well coaching or mentoring initiatives land within that institution. So we need to be aware of that. But the more interesting thing, perhaps, is we found that when there are interventions taking place within these various quadrants, those interventions also have an impact on the educational environment. So quite an interesting interaction between those two things. So I hope that's been useful. This has been an attempt to just give you an overview of what is meant by coaching and education, what's actually happening in practice. So that's what it is, the global framework. It's a living document. This might not be the final version of it. We're constantly working on this. This is what we're interested in, and the question that drives us is, how can coaching and mentoring help educators and educational leaders and policymakers? How can it help to create the best and most ideal learning environments for our students?